Eric Brynjolfsson, IDE, and our speaker today is Maarten Goos, who was a professor of economics at Utrecht University, visiting here for, I think, a year or?
No, 5 months.
5, okay.
Yeah.
So we'll have to be very efficient. He's won a long list of awards for research and for teaching, known for a lot of work on some of the ways technology is affecting work. And I think really great research is stuff that changes your priors of what you believe. I've always thought that middlemen, especially real estate brokers, were overpaid, but I think maybe he will convince me otherwise. So take it away, Maarten.
Thanks, Eric, for having me, not just today, but also at the IDE for the 5 months. So this is joint work with a former colleague of mine, Eric Buist, who's a real estate economist, and we're using some of his data. And then 2 of our PhD students. Could you speak up louder? Even louder? Yeah, I can't hear you. Okay. And then 2 of our PhD students, Roel and Bert. So, to the economists in the room, social value has a clear meaning. For those of you who are not economists, an alternative title to this talk could be, is my realtor overpaid? So I'm going to be trying to answer that question. And so I'm going to give you a short introduction, then give you a framework that mainly stick to the intuition of how intermediation can create social value, and then apply that to the case of real estate brokerage. So the backdrop of this project is that during each episode of technological progress and the promise of direct trade that comes with that, pundits have predicted that middlemen would disappear. An example is the 1995 book by Bill Gates, The Road Ahead, where he says that the internet would become the ultimate go-between the universal middleman, such that the only humans involved in interaction would be the actual buyer themselves. However, 30 years later, we know that there's probably more middlemen than ever. Think of the emergence of new types of online intermediation, eBay, Amazon, LinkedIn, but also offline intermediation, real estate agents, headhunters, sales reps, etc. Now, the next couple of slides show you some data on the number of middlemen and how that has increased over time. I'm not going to show you those data. I'll get back to that later on if we have time to discuss that. Now, together with the rise of the middleman economy, there's also some uprise in hostility towards middlemen, because they do not create any wealth or value, because they do not create anything real, not even a direct service. And one example of that is if you, for example, look at the dictionary, the Oxford English Dictionary, it defines a middleman as a person standing in an immediate relation to 2 parties, often with unfavorable connotations, as implying that direct relations between these parties would be preferable. And it goes on, it says, as a person who deals in stolen goods. My favorite is actually Republican Senator Mike Lee. In reaction to the State of the Union address in 2014, he responded that the president had promised an economy for the middle class, but all he delivered was an economy for the middleman. Now, as an economist, of course, we think that social value is not created by the work or the effort that you put in, or production per se. Sweat that we put in is maybe a necessary but not a sufficient condition to create social value. Social value is created by exchange. And so if we think that middlemen have become more important, it must be that they enable beneficial trade between buyers and sellers. Now, to some extent, economists have a limited understanding of what it exactly is that these middlemen do and how they create social value. For example, I've done some work on job polarization in the past, where you see that there is this hollowing out of middling occupations, which are mainly occupations in manufacturing and office clerks, towards low-paid and high-paid occupations and services. And these low-paid and high-paid occupations and services include middlemen occupations. And typically, you would say that, therefore, the increase in the relative demand for middlemen has combined through the, or is because of the Q complementarity between these occupations and digital capital, where both are used as inputs in an aggregate production function. And maybe at an aggregate level, I think the job polarization literature has been notably successful in explaining aggregate trends, but at a more disaggregate level, it remains pretty silent about what it exactly is, what the tasks are that these middlemen do, and how they create social value.
So on your second bullet, it says if they become more important, it must be that they enable beneficial trade. Is that sort of assuming the conclusion? I mean, aren't there other ways that it's possible that someone can become a better rent seeker and create a more rent-seeking economy, and then you see more, Jason Perman and Orzag and others have written that there's evidence that rents and concentration have gone up. So aren't there other ways that something could grow in the economy without being more beneficial?
Absolutely. And so I'm kind of assuming here that there is no imperfections, or that whenever there is a buyer who's willing to buy at a price that is higher than the seller's reservation price of selling a good, that both can benefit from that trade. And middlemen are basically getting in between that trade to organize that exchange, which is a very kind of competitive way of looking at things. You'll see that in the model or the framework that I'm going to be presenting, it will have both some rents that are created by the match between buyers and sellers that are going to be exploited by these middlemen. But I agree. So
maybe it should say, instead of it must be, it could be.
It could be, yes.
Just to clarify, do you mean by middlemen, for example, all retail sales, department stores, restaurants, anything that sells anything? Anybody that sells, is a department store, middleman, or set of middlemen? They're in between the producers and the consumers. How they,
Right. So I'm going to be defining a middleman as an agent that is going to be offering a service to buyers and sellers, and buyers and sellers are going to be self-selecting into that service, or they're going to trade independently.
That's what a retail store does.
That's what a retail store does. So yes.
Well, the retail store could do other services as well, right? They could provide some kind of repair or some kind of display or whatever. I mean, they could be doing things.
Well, display is what the middleman shows, brings buyers and sellers together in various ways.
It's sort of semantic.
Right.
And when you say increased employment, you mean literally there are more people, humans, who are now
Yes.
than
So
there were 20 years ago?
right. So that's my suspicion, in the sense that there's no official definition of middleman. So there's no statistics that you can look up on how many middlemen there are. But for example, from the job polarization literature, we know that the jobs that are disappearing because of technological progress, these are not the middleman jobs. So, but I would love to get my hands on better statistics on middlemen. I think for now, the framework that I'm going to be presenting is also a very general framework. It's, for example, also going to apply to some extent to platforms. And it's just going to be, I think, looking at some ingredients of many of the activities that you see around, as long as there is some sort of buyers and sellers being brought together by middlemen in a very general way. Okay, so what this paper is going to do is I'm going to be providing a very general framework that is going to have a number of building blocks. The first building block is going to be that it's a ROI framework in which buyers and sellers self-select into using an intermediary or trading independently. And what we're going to argue is that self-selection under some conditions is going to give rise to externalities to users of the intermediary market. And those intermediaries are therefore going to be internalizing these externalities that are entailed by that self-selection of buyers and sellers into hiring an intermediary or not. Those externalities are going to be internalized by these middlemen but also depending on how perfectly competitive the intermediary industry is going to be. And because we do look at externalities, we can also look at some policy components. And I'm going to apply that framework to the Belgian real estate approach. Now, to give you a sneak preview of some of the results, so here are the same building blocks. So I'm going to be having selection, externalities, competition, policy, and one of the stories that I'm going to be telling is that if there's ROI selection, I'll explain what that is later on. If there's ROI self-selection of buyers and sellers into either if you hire an intermediary to buy or sell a good or not, then to some degree selection is always going to be positive. And if there is positive selection, that's going to entail negative cross-site externalities to people that are using intermediaries, as long as there's some uncertainty, some ex-ante uncertainty over the sales price that exists when a buyer and a seller decide to either use the intermediary. And so self-selection, if it's positive, it generates negative externalities, and those negative externalities are internalized by the intermediaries by pushing up the service fees that they ask for intermediation. And now it is possible, however, that if positive selection dominates, so these negative externalities are really important, that there's too much competition between the intermediaries such that the service fees are lower than what they would have to be from a social point of view. And what that means in terms of policy is that actually the optimal policy response would be to reduce competition by, for example, imposing entry barriers in the intermediary market, and tax the increased intermediary profits to compensate the loss in consumer surplus for buyers and sellers. So, for example, we sometimes talk about taxing the robots as a policy. Well, this would be a case in which taxing not robots, but these new businesses, these new middleman businesses, so you protect them to make sure that they can earn profits, and then you tax their profits and you redistribute to consumers. And what this framework is saying is that that's going to maximize social value created by the middleman industry. Also note that, and this is going to be the case in the Belgian real estate brokerage. So, the answer to the question, is my realtor overpaid? In this case, if you would buy a Belgian property, sell a Belgian property, is no. Because this is going to be a case where, because of positive self-selection and these negative externalities, but too much competition between intermediaries, the service fees that are charged by real estate brokers are going to be too low relative to the social optimum. Irina. I'm going to get to that. Okay. So one of the important building blocks is going to be ROI type selection, which can be positive or negative. I'll get to that. There's other alternative scenarios that I'm going to be talking about. This is just one policy scenario, so it's just some of the results, not all of the results. There will be 3 policy scenarios that can come out of this framework.
And you're saying tax the intermediaries, but I guess how does that increase the rewards to intermediaries?
Well, you have to first of all, you have to reduce competition some way, because competition is just too high. So the idea is that because of self-selection, that entails a negative externality. So you want fees to be at some level, and competition between intermediaries can actually be too strong, such that the service fees that are charged by the private market are going to be below that social optimum that is fully internalizing these negative externalities. Now, what that means is that you have to somehow get the number of transactions in that market down by reducing competition between the intermediaries so that they can earn higher profit, and then tax that profit because consumer surplus is going to go down.
You want the number of transactions in your intermediary market to go down?
Yes.
Can you explain why there's a negative, where's the externality from here?
Right. So that's a crucial point. The externality is going to come from the fact that when buyers and sellers have to decide whether to hire a middleman or not, they have to make expectations about who they're going to be meeting with or matched with by the intermediary once they decide for either the intermediary or the outside market. So suppose that you are thinking of hiring a realtor, but making that decision whether you want to hire a realtor or not, you know, of course, what your own, if you're a buyer, what your own valuation of a house is, but you don't know whom you will be matched with by the intermediary, which seller that you will be matched to by the intermediary. And that gives you some uncertainty about the sales price or about the type of seller that you will need and therefore the sales price that you will have to pay. And it's that uncertainty over the sales price that is going to entail an externality in the sense that if, and it relates to the selection, if, say that there's positive selection of buyers in the intermediary market.
What does that mean?
That means, I'm going to define that in a second, that means that the marginal buyer's valuation is lower than the inframarginal buyer's valuations. And so additional trade on the intermediary market means that the marginal buyer that is entering that market is lowering the expected valuation of buyers that sellers can expect when they meet up and they decide to use the intermediary market. It'll become clear in a second, but it's one of the crucial building blocks of the model. How does Roy-type self-selection patterns give rise to externalities? But there must be some uncertainty over the sales price. So there is actually, so you have the building blocks which are in bold. The letters that are in italics here are critical for the model to work, for the framework to apply. That is, you have to have self-selection. And you have to have some uncertainty over the sales price. If that breaks down, then this framework is not going to apply to the market. So we can come back to that later on. Okay, so in terms of the literature, I'm going to start so that one of the building blocks is going to be that Roy-type selection. Andre? Doesn't that rule out the? Well, it would have to be, right, so it would have to be uncertainty in terms of if I decide to go to this shop or that shop, what price am I going to see in that shop? If there's some uncertainty there, then, that's going to be okay. Right. Yeah. Right. Right. So the way that I'm going to be modeling the price uncertainty is going to be through a bargain. So if I meet up with a seller, then we aren't going to have to bargain over the price. But if I example don't know what your reference point in the bargain is, there's some uncertainty about the sales price. And you must have that. So you must have that uncertainty about the sales price. Otherwise, the model isn't.
More like a match value.
Right. Yeah.
It's not necessarily not with the price. It's about like person
Sure.
match value.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. But it'll become clear in a second. So what the model can do and where it does apply and where it doesn't. So the Roy model, even though it's classic 1951, it's still going very strong across different fields in economics. So the Roy model has been applied, for example, to health economics, to the gender gap. There's some papers looking at taxation and redistribution, at Snowden and Order, that looks at technology from a Roy perspective. Costino and Vogel, looking at international trade, occupational choice, etc. And so there's a very extensive empirical, very lively empirical literature that tries to apply the framework, the Roy framework, and I'm going to be applying it to middlemen. Of course, we talk about intermediation, so there is, of course, the early literature overview in Spooler. There is a paper by David, the ER working paper, that looks at intermediation in labor markets, gives a nice overview. And then, of course, when you talk about intermediation, you also kind of go into the platform literature. Now, for those of you who are familiar to platforms, in terms of the Parker van Alstyne Schudery language, what I'm not going to be focusing on here is the launching of the platform and the size externalities, but more on the curation and the quality of the platform and what type of buyers and sellers or what type of users you can attract on both sides of the platform. I'm also going to have a matching, so that's the matching that we talked about, that is done by an intermediary. And there's some papers that look at platforms, assuming that platforms are also matchmakers. So there are also some papers cited here, and too. And actually, there's very strong correlation between first bullet point and what I've been exposed to over the last couple of months in E52 and the second bullet point, and with what I've been exposed to at E94. So thanks for that. So been a true inspiration. So I'm not going to walk you through the model, okay? So through the entire model, I'm just going to give you the intuition. And the easiest way to do that is to think of the following stages. So you have intermediaries announcing their service fees, and then you have buyers and sellers that have to decide whether they want to hire that intermediary for that service fee, or they want to not hire an intermediary, trade independently. And then some guys decide to hire the intermediary, and others don't. That's it. Okay? So that's the different stages. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be running through this in terms of how I explain the model, running through it backwards. But before I start doing that, an important ingredient in the Roy framework is that we're going to be assuming that buyers and sellers have different valuations of buying or selling a good on the intermediary market or on the outside market. And so each buyer has a BI and a BO, and BI tells you how much you're willing to pay for a good in the intermediary market, and BO tells you how much that same individual is willing to pay for the good when he does not hire it.
I don't understand. So if I want to buy a house, I could look on my own, or I could go to a realtor. And why is it that my valuation is going to differ? If I see a house that's $800,000, that's my valuation. I don't care whether the realtor showed it to me or I drove by and saw signs saying for sale.
Right. Well, it could be that you have search and transaction costs, and that the realtor is affecting individual search and transaction costs differently. Or you might just be attached to a realtor. You might have a preference for using that realtor. Or you might hate realtors and therefore want to trade in the outside market.
But okay, so you're mixing, you're adding the cost of the realtor to the cost of buying the good. Normally, I think if I'm going to buy a house, it's a certain amount of money, and if there's a realtor, the realtor's going to get a cut.
Right.
And you have one-to-one. You have one buyer and one seller, and they bargain. Normally, if you're selling a house or buying a house, the idea of a realtor is to get lots of people to see the house.
Right.
And then you make an offer, they make offers, and you pick the highest one.
Well, okay, so the service fees, so you talk about real costs. The service fees are not in here, are not in these valuations. These valuations are just about either transaction or search costs that are affected differently or preferences that people have. So again, that's a, and you can think of, can we deviate from that assumption? But these are just, this is one of the building blocks in any ROI framework that you can think of.
Is this one way to think about it, that the intermediary provides some intangible service, that one of the reasons you go to the car dealer instead of going, is that there's something, who knows what, that the car dealer does to make your job easier. So you say, okay, I'll pay $500 more or $5,000 more just to get the thing done at the car dealer. And maybe some bundle of things
Absolutely,
the dealer
yes.
does. Yeah.
Right, absolutely.
So even though the ultimate car might be the same, if it was me, I might be more willing to just, I think it's easier to go through a dealership.
Exactly.
And that's the dealer gets a markup.
The dealer gets, I'm willing to pay a little bit more.
Right.
I'm not, you can't necessarily articulate exactly what it is, but there's some, it does seem a little easier to go through the dealership.
Andre.
So I guess the key part of this competition is that not competing intermediaries are not a job they're doing in providing intermediary service.
Absolutely.
Like if someone innovates by coming up with a mobile app, that's not in your model. So there's no room.
Absolutely. Well, I think what would be the case here is that I'm just going to take these as given. Now, do intermediaries have an incentive to influence these valuations? Yes. Right? So they could use technology, they could use all sorts of things to influence these values. That's going to be okay. So you could include that in the model as long as intermediaries are not allowed to stop the self-selection process. So as long as intermediaries cannot block people from using their services. That's going to be, hitting one of these or touching on one of these critical assumptions. But no.
But just on the interpretation that I was sort of putting, I mean, is this just another way, the intermediary adds some value add, and that's what the difference is between BI and BO, that there's some intermediate,
Right.
and that value add is heterogeneous across different
Exactly.
people. So
Exactly.
there's some, just in a way, it's not like different than any other agent in the economy. They're producing something and they get paid for it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Valuation in the stem from perhaps related to diversity about quality, like if there's
Could.
some screening or
Right. So it could be, yes, it could be. Though I'm not going to be, so I'm going to be assuming that the goods that you can find on, or that you want to buy or sell on the intermediary and the outside market are identical. Right, so it's not that there's differentiated goods. That would, differences in quality of goods, how they're perceived by buyers and sellers would end up in these parameters, not end up in terms of having to choose between different goods when you enter one of the two markets.
But just to, maybe how is this different than a model of just production? I mean, so if I buy iron ore from different people and some of them convert it into steel, is that a model of intermediaries? And I'm willing to pay more from the guy who does more versus less. I mean, I could buy it myself, or I could buy it from the steel manufacturer. I mean, that doesn't seem. Is there some reason this is called intermediary as opposed to someone who adds value?
I guess not in that sense, but I don't know whether that would still work in terms of the self-selection process. Because what's critical here is the intermediary. He's just, he's attracting buyers and sellers, and those buyers and sellers with their different valuations can self-select or not into your market. That really has to apply for this framework to.
That's true for the steel. Providing something that you're.
If there's a bunch of people with different prices of iron ore and different value of steel.
Some are going to go to the steel makers, and it's going to buy steel.
Yeah. Okay. So, and then delta B is going to give you the buyer's relative valuation of the intermediary market. So how much he values buying that good from the intermediary market relative to trading elsewhere. Same for sellers. Each seller has a reservation price for selling the property, the real estate property, to the intermediary or not, and then that difference, that delta S, is going to give you how much the seller, that individual specific delta S, is giving you how much that seller is valuing the intermediary service. Now, that's the heterogeneity that we're going to assume, and that's really going to be crucial. And again, you can think of many different ways that, settings in which that heterogeneity, how that comes about, or platforms or intermediaries trying to affect these values. That's the starting point. Now, let's first look at what happens to trade in the intermediary market. And again, what I'm assuming is that once you've decided not to hire an intermediary, as a buyer, you're going to be matched with a seller and vice versa, and you bargain over the price. And the price that's going to come out of that is going to be PO, which depends on the PO and the SO that happen to occur in that match. And that's just going to be a weighted average of these two. We just assume a match bargain, where beta is the bargaining weight of the seller.
How important is it for this to be like have uncertainty on both sides? I mean, would the model have the same results if you just had a uniform price on the seller side and all the heterogeneity was on the buyer side?
You could still have that, yes.
It would be simpler, wouldn't it?
Right. So I'm going to show you some examples of that. But it's going to be to have heterogeneity on both sides is really one of the key ingredients of the Roy type selection model. So if you simplify it to only one side being heterogeneous, you really simplify the selection patterns, I think.
Isn't simpler better?
Yeah, but you also lose qualitatively, you also lose some important insights in terms of policy, for example. So that's the price that you're going to be negotiating in the outside market, and then the same happens for the intermediary market. So you're going to have a transaction price PI, which is going to be the weighted average of how much I value as a buyer that good. And then here it looks almost the same as in the outside market, except for the fee that I've added here. This is just a lump sum fee that you pay to a realtor. This is a proportional transaction fee. And here I assume that it's the seller that is paying the fees to the realtor, not the buyer, but that doesn't matter. That's anyway, utility is typically transferable in this market. So it doesn't matter who charges the service fee, either sellers or buyers or both. It doesn't matter. So these are the two prices that are negotiated once you enter the outside and intermediary market. Now, let's start thinking about what happens if you have to decide whether to participate in the intermediary market or the outside market. So of course, if I'm a buyer, for example, I know that I have my own valuation of that property, the price I have to pay, and the price is given by this expression here. But ex ante, when I have to decide whether to hire an intermediary or not, I don't know what PI is going to be, because even though I know my own PI, I don't know what SI is going to be. I don't know who am I going to be matched with by the intermediary. And so the best thing I can do ex ante is to just form expectations about who am I going to be meeting. And if if matching is random, this is just going to be the average reservation price of sellers in the intermediary market, participating in the intermediary market. And so basically my expected utility, my ex ante expected utility for hiring an intermediary is going to be my own valuation minus the expected price, which is now here formed by this SI bar. Now, if this is positive, it doesn't mean that I'm going to be participating in the intermediary market, because I also have to see what my expected utility is in the outside market, which has a similar expression as the SO bar substituting for the SO. And if this difference is positive, then I'm going to be demanding minimum services as a buyer. But
yes, I guess I'm bothered by this. You only have one buyer, and once you bargain one-on-one when you go through an intermediary. I always think of the intermediary as to avoid that bargaining. If I want to sell my car directly on Craigslist or whatever, or buy a car that way, I'm going to end up bargaining. But if I don't want to deal with that, I go to a dealer and sell the car to a dealer or buy a car from a dealer, and it's just a price. And the advantage of the dealer is that the dealer can get lots of people to come and look at the cars. That's the service the dealer provides.
Yes, so you can think of different ways of organizing this transaction process. And again, and you can do that. What is critical is that at the end of the day, you need to have some uncertainty that you face as a buyer when you enter the market about the sales price that you're going to have to pay. That's all you need intuitively. In terms of solving the model, it's going to be perhaps less tractable. But it has to be some uncertainty over the sales price, which in this case is just captured by this bargaining process. Okay? And so if this is positive, then I'm going to be demanding middleman services. And you can look, so it's going to be positive for all buyers who have a delta B that's bigger than this one, which we call delta B tilde. And so, this is all the delta B's that are bigger than the delta B tilde are going to be demanding middleman services, and you can all add them up. And this gives you the total number of buyers that are going to be using intermediary services. And intuitively, it makes sense. So the demand depends negatively on the service fees. It also depends negatively on the average reservation price of sellers in the intermediary market, and positively on the average reservation price of buyers that sellers are asking on the outside market. This tells you just something about how many buyers are going to be deciding to hire a broker or not. It doesn't tell you whether these guys that are in the end using that broker are the guys that value the bit the most or the least. So it could be that you have a very low BI with an even lower B0, such that the guys that are selecting themselves into the intermediary market are the guys with the lowest BI relative to all the buyers that would enter the intermediary market. And that brings me to the topic of selection, and I'm almost there because once there's 2 more slides, and then everything is going to follow logically from that. So I've just said that there's a number of buyers that are going into the intermediary market, and the rest is going to the outside market. But we don't know whether these buyers that are going into the intermediary market are, relatively speaking, the guys with the high or the low BI. Now, if it's the case that the guys with the highest BIs are the ones that also have the highest delta Bs, then there's positive selection, and that's captured by the fact that buyer selection in the intermediary market is positive if the average valuation of the buyers that are using the intermediary market is bigger than the valuation of the marginal user, the marginal buyer in the intermediary market. Just saying that the guys that are entering the intermediate market first are the ones with the highest BIs, are the ones with the highest evaluation for buying that property through an intermediary. And if it's negative, there's negative selection, and that's the definition of selection in a Roy model. And that's for buyers in the intermediary market. You also have buyers on the outside market, the same. So if there's positive selection of buyers in the outside market, this difference is positive. It's just capturing that the infra-marginal buyers in the outside market have, on average, a higher valuation than the marginal buyers. And what Roy says is that one of these two has to be positive. Now, in the paper we have a short section that explains that. But one of these two has to be positive. So selection has to be positive at least for buyers in the intermediary market or for buyers in the outside market, or it can be positive for both, but it cannot be negative. Now, the last slide before I can start making some mileage, is how the selection patterns are entailing externalities. And what I'm going to be saying is that if buyer selection in the intermediary market is positive, then that's going to entail a negative cross-site externality to sellers in the intermediary market. Because if there's one additional transaction for the intermediary market, it means that the buyer that enters that intermediary market has a relatively low valuation. So he's going to bring down the average valuation that sellers can expect in the intermediary market. And so positive selection of buyers in the intermediary market is going to entail a negative cross-site externality for sellers in the intermediary market.
Doesn't positive selection mean that the buyer has a higher valuation?
So positive selection means that the infra-marginal buyers have higher valuation than the marginal buyers.
Infra-marginal, so the marginal buyer has a lower valuation.
Exactly.
The positive selection means the buyer has a marginal buyer has
Exactly.
a lower valuation.
And that's important because that is exactly why you get that negative cross-site externality to sellers. Because if you have one additional transaction, you need one additional buyer, but that buyer has a relatively low valuation, and so that means that that buyer is going to bring down the average that sellers can expect when they decide to enter the market.
But that's exactly the problem with this. There's only one buyer and one seller. When you add one more person to it, if there's one more buyer, now we add another buyer to the market, what that's going to do is there are more people that are coming to look at the dealership or whatever, to look at the houses, to look at the cars. That's going to raise the expected price. That's why you go to a dealer. You're creating a situation where because it's only one-on-one, you're saying the set of people is going to be such that we're adding a low-value person.
Right.
But that is not how these things work. I mean, that's not how these dealerships or realtors work.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people coming to look at the house or look at the car.
Right. I would have to think about that. How those settings would change the selection patterns. I'm not entirely sure that it has to be a one-on-one match that is driving the externalities from selection patterns here.
But then I don't see what would drive it otherwise.
Andre.
Yeah, so maybe slightly simpler, so regular platform setting, apps or something. Here, once again, I don't understand, obviously, many different situations, but like anything one while it's different. I mean, yeah, the platform has incentives that are not socially optimal. They care about the cross-side user.
Right.
The average user. It's very standard feature of these types of models. So what is it?
So what I'm going to show you is in the pricing. It's going to look like a spend distortion, but it's going to be something completely different. And we can talk about that later. So. Right. Right. So one of the things that I definitely take away, and that's also the last bullet point in my last slide, is to look for. I'm applying it to the real estate market to look for other applications, and there will be a search for conditions under which this holds or does not hold. I think that's really a promising agenda that I would like to pursue. Okay, so I've talked about the externalities. So if there's positive buyer selection on the intermediary market, that's going to entail a negative externality for sellers in the intermediary market and vice versa. And here you also get the same intuition for positive selection of buyers in the outside market. Because what happens is that if you generate additional trade in the intermediary market, you have to get that additional buyer or it's not a single buyer here. It's a mass of marginal buyers. Because we assume that there's an also
Let me just make sure I'm understanding that, because I'm sort of a little bit with Bobber. So
yeah.
I'm a seller in there, okay? There's 10 buyers.
Right.
One additional buyer comes in. I'm made worse off because that new buyer might have a lower value than the other
Right.
ones. And I don't get a choice, because my intuition is pretty strong that I would say, well, you're out of this. You're not, these other 9 guys, these other 10 guys have higher values. Why does this other person who has a lower value make me worse off? It just,
randomly match.
I mean, it seems
Yes.
like, you know,
Yes.
that I'm somehow forced to match up with this person, even though there's other people waiting there with cash, and I say, sorry, I know you have cash, but I was matched with this guy. Is that the story?
Well, I think the story is it's that uncertainty plays at the moment when you decide whether to hire a broker or not. It doesn't. The uncertainty doesn't play at the time you're matched, because when we're matched, I know what your valuation is. Only when I decided to go to that broker or not, I didn't know that I was going to meet you.
So it's like some kind of very inefficient matching, like very,
Right.
very, so it gets crowded out when more noisy people come in. Then they make it worse, because now these people are really bad matches, but they're entering the market.
Right.
Okay.
Right. But the uncertainty.
And you're stuck, you're forced to contract with them.
Right.
Okay. So it's
Yeah.
sort of in a way, it's not a very efficient market. It's right.
No, it's not. I mean,
that's part of what's driving.
There's lots of ex-ante uncertainty about who you're going to meet. It doesn't have to be uncertainty when you meet, but before you decide which matching channel to choose, there has to be uncertainty about the type that you're going to be meeting.
Got it.
So,
I know it's saying that your reserve costs will be superior, like infinite, they just have to accept their
right.
deal.
Yes. So So we assume that whenever you meet, it's beneficial for you to either buy or sell. Okay. So let me. So you have exactly the same on the seller side. So you also get selection of sellers into intermediary and the outside market, and they're going to be entailing, if it's positive, they're going to be entailing negative cross-site externalities to buyers in the intermediary market. And one of these two has to be positive. And of course, what's going to happen is that the intermediaries are going to be internalizing these externalities, but only to the extent that they can set their fees so to the extent that there's not too much competition among intermediaries in setting their services. And so let me cut through a graphical example because I want to say something about, I want to show you one picture at the data too. So this is in the end the equilibrium that you're going to get. And I'll explain what it is. So this is the average revenue for the intermediary. It's just the demand by buyers and sellers for intermediary services as a function of the service fees. And what the intermediary market is going to do is it's going to set the service fees at a level where they're equal to the marginal cost and then a markup for the marginal costs, which is a theta, which is capturing competition between intermediaries. If it's 0, then this line just becomes marginal cost. If it's 1, then this line goes through this point here, which is cartel pricing and open quotes. So any number between 0 and 1 is going to be capturing competition between intermediaries. And then this first term here is just, if theta would be 1, that's just the classic market distortion of the monopolist. And then this last term here is going to be the way in which the intermediary is going to internalise the self-selection patterns and the externalities that they entail. Here you see that this externality here is always the externality is always negative. So I'm assuming here that there's positive selection of both buyers and sellers in the intermediary market, and there's no heterogeneity in the outside market. So that's a simplified model, such that we know that there's always positive selection of buyers and sellers in the intermediary market if there's no heterogeneity in the outside market. And so this is going to be the social loss from that positive self-selection entailing these negative cross-site externalities. And that curve here is the way in which the intermediary can internalize that negative cross-site externality of both buyers and sellers in the intermediary market. And this is the equilibrium point, and these areas here are the social value created by this middleman industry. Consumer surplus is A minus C, and the profits are B. Now, what a social planner is going to do is he's going to be maximizing A minus C plus B. The intermediary market isn't necessarily going to maximizing the social value. And if you would take this simple example and you would maximize the total social value, you get this picture here. The private outcome that I've just shown you was here. What the social planner is going to do is he's going to be ignoring any classic market power, but he's going to be internalizing these negative externalities that come from positive selection of buyers and sellers. And so he's going to be setting the average service fee here. And what happens here is that if you go from the private market outcome to the socially optimal outcome, you increase service fees, so you reduce the number of transactions, and you increase service fees by reducing competition among intermediaries. That's going to be maximizing A minus C plus B, and of course it's going to be increasing profits because you get close to the cartel outcome. And so what you can do is you can tax profits, the increased profits of intermediaries, and compensate the consumers, the buyers and the sellers, for their loss in consumer surplus. You mean the service fees would have to be
proportional to the price that also
that's what we have here. So, yes, we have both. So we have a lump sum fee, conditional on transaction occurring, and a proportional fee. Now, I'm going to show you almost this picture with numbers for the real estate market. There's just one thing that I'm going to have to add, because here I assume that N is given and fixed costs are 0. So if I assume now that there's free entry and fixed costs are positive, so fixed costs of intermediation are positive, this is the private market outcome, which looks identical to the private market outcome I just shown you, only there now is this downward sloping average cost curve, which goes through that private market outcome. And that the profits have disappeared, right? Because they're all going into fixed costs, and intermediaries don't make any profit. There's free entry up to the point where profits are 0. So this is the private market outcome with free entry and positive fixed costs. The social optimal outcome with free entry and fixed costs would be this outcome. Again, the private outcome was here, and what the social planner is going to do is, again, because there is too much competition, the fee is too big, there's too much competition between intermediaries, the service fee is below the socially optimal service fee. And so the social planning is going to increase the service fee by reducing competition among intermediaries. And it's also going to do that, it can do that by reducing the number of intermediaries, because fixed costs are just wasteful from a social point of view. And by reducing the number of intermediaries, you create profits. So the incumbent intermediaries that can enter the market. But the intuition is exactly the same. So what's going to happen here is that if you have this as a private outcome, it would be socially optimal to reduce competition, possibly by putting up entry barriers and taxing these increased profits to compensate buyers and sellers for their loss in consumer surplus. In the last minute I have, here are the numbers for real estate brokerage. So this is the private market outcome. And so the average property in Belgium, so this is 2013, cost 215,000 euros. The average commission rate is 4.3%. And the average markup is €5,800, and that consists of the sum of these two. So these are these two components times theta, which is about a quarter, to capture competition between these intermediaries. And then most importantly, the social value created by these realtors. So the area A is 800 million, C the externality. So this is the social loss from positive selection of buyers and sellers into the intermediate market is 288 million. So the difference is 578 million. There's no profit because there's free entry that we assume. And so the total value created by this industry, by these middlemen, is 508 million. And if you would allow a social planner to maximize the total social value, you see that it almost doubles. First of all, the service fees go up a little bit, from 4.3 to 5%, which is not much, but it does suggest that Belgian realtors are not overpaid. The property price goes up as a consequence of that. The social planner is going to set a marker that is just internalizing social loss from positive selection. And then the consumer surplus goes down a little bit. And then there's a big gain in profits because the social plan is going to restrict entry of renewables to the market. And again, what you would want to do here is you want to tax these profits and compensate the loss in consumer surplus. So that's just one way in which you can look at a middleman economy. So let me conclude. This paper presented a general framework of how middlemen create social value through the self-selection of buyers and sellers, directed as in ROI. The nature of intermediation implies ROI selection most likely entails externality that will be internalized by these middlemen, but only depending on the degree of competition in their industry. And because middlemen do not generally maximize social value, that gives you different policy scenarios. I've just talked about one. There's two more policy scenarios in the paper. For example, what happens if negative selection dominates? Gives you very different policy conclusions. And then finally, the most important point, and I think for me also takeaway from this seminar, is that I've given you a very broad framework. But what would be very interesting to do is, given the very extensive knowledge that we have of applying the role model across these different fields in economics, and also given the richness of data that we have on middleman activities, I think it would be very interesting to further test this framework in the right settings, using the right data.
A question about whether I'm interpreting paper correctly. Isn't one way to frame it from the social welfare perspective is to how to optimally segment the market to one, people that are on the intermediary and have a particular matching function with each other, and then another one where they're off the intermediary and they're using the outside option. Optimally matching each other. Is that completely analogous to the social welfare problem?
So the social welfare problem that I've talked about here is just looking at maximizing the social value on the intermediary market. You can also think of a social planner as maximizing the social value created on both markets, the outside market and the intermediary market. And that's really, I think, what you're getting at. So a social planner that can sort people across these two markets. And we have it in the paper. It gives you quite different results. Well, because I'm just trying to look at, I'm trying to compare the social value created by the middleman relative to its maximum value. could see on the intermediary market. But I agree, you could think of a social planet as maximizing economy-wide welfare. And we have that in the paper.
So this is a particular kind of middleman. To me, it seems like a very limited kind of middleman. There's still just there's these two inside and outside market, intermediary and outside market. They're both just matching one-on-one. The intermediary isn't really doing all that much other than some unspecified value add that changes the valuation.
Yeah.
I mean, there's been a lot of markets that have been affected tremendously by, as I call them, market makers that make a market. Whether it's the stock exchanges going to the Big Bang or the multiple listing service in real estate where I go and I can see the whole list of everybody, or Airbnb. And what those do is they move you from having to do these one-on-one matches to seeing all of them. That's the kind of intermediary that seems immensely more powerful, and it would be, I think, it'd be very interesting instead of having the intermediary essentially do the same thing as the outside market, just with some different beta, BIs and BOs, have them truly change the nature of the market, be a market maker, and then I think you get then you get much more social value, and you can see that all those kinds of weird externalities would, a lot of them I suspect, would disappear, but you'd have to model it.
Well, that's a good suggestion. That's also definitely something that
and that's what seems to be happening market after market, is you're getting visibility that you didn't have before. And maybe you could have a parameter as to what amount of visibility, but the simplest would be to make it extreme all the way.
Right.
But that looks like what's happening in markets that have become more electronic.
And to look at the data.
Just one more comment. The way the platform competition works is typically not that. You assume that everyone's identical and has a difficult selection of the platform. And two pretty distinct features that are ordinary. Different types of people selecting different intermediaries, which currently happening. And there's also terms of scale, which is what causes these platforms to be big. And I'm a little confused about how we can take this framework and data and this market, because it's so different.
Well, part of the returns to scale comes when you get visibility of more and more. You get to make a thicker market, right?
Well, I agree. So this is the cross-site externalities that are so important in the platform literature are not the cross-site externalities that are present here. This is really about the quality of buyers and sellers, or the quality of users that you can attract on the platform. It's not about the size of the other side of the market. Well, no, sure. I think so. I'll for real estate brokers, you might think it's more realistic than for Amazon, for example. I agree. So it might.
You're like making this like about middlemen. How you're framing it is very broad, and I think that you're doing the service that you're trying to not.
I agree. I'll narrow it. I'll narrow it down, and I'll think about very specific occupations that are more applicable to this framework. I agree.
So I'm sorry, I'm afraid we're out of time. Maarten, thank you very much for
Thank you.
sharing that with us.